Before we begin, subscribe so you never miss another sleepless night. Now, let's begin. Five years ago, my wife Amanda, our son Cadence, and I packed up our lives and headed for a secluded patch of hills outside Knoxville. City life had worn us down, and we longed for something quieter and more self-sufficient. We bought a few acres with an old house and installed solar panels and a pump for the well so we wouldn't have to rely on anyone else. A winding drive led from the county road past a vacant parcel to our front porch. For months, the only sounds were wind in the trees and the cluck of our chickens. Then a man named Jed bought the empty lot next door and set to work fixing up the dilapidated cabin there. At first, he came across as friendly enough. One muggy afternoon, I spotted him carrying crates from his truck. I carried over a plate of cookies that Amanda had just pulled from the oven and introduced myself. "I'm Cody, your neighbor," I said. "Welcome." He wiped his brow, shook my hand hard, and told me his name. "Jed," he said. "Up from the north, needed a change." We made small talk. He said he drove long-haul trucks and liked the quiet. I told him about our little garden plot and the flock of laying hens. I told him if he needed anything, he should holler. For a week or two, nothing seemed amiss. Soon, however, I noticed him wandering along the boundary between our properties with a tape measure. He drove stakes into the ground as if redrawing the line. One morning, he came up our porch steps with a rolled map in his hands. Cadence had answered the door, but I took over. Jed pointed to the paper and said our fence encroached on his acreage by several paces. I frowned. When we bought the place, we'd hired a surveyor, and the corners were marked with iron pipes. Jed insisted his deed showed the line farther in our direction. We started off politely, but he wouldn't drop the issue. Days later, I discovered our markers pulled out of the earth and his stakes driven deeper into our yard. I called the county office and paid to have the property surveyed again. The surveyor confirmed what I already knew: our fence sat exactly where it should. Jed glared from his porch as the official packed up his equipment. After the man left, Jed stomped over. "That guy's wrong," he snapped. "I know my boundaries." I told him the county's decision was final. He leaned in close and muttered, "This isn't finished," before marching back to his cabin. After that, the neighborly facade disintegrated. More and more, I'd catch Jed peering at our house through his curtains. Sometimes, I'd hear the low rumble of his pickup idling near the end of our driveway in the middle of the night, its lights off. Amanda began to tense up after sundown. Sitting on the porch one evening, she whispered, "He's watching us." I tried to reassure her. Maybe he's just lonely. I'll go talk again. But every conversation only made him angrier. He started complaining about ordinary noises. "Our chickens cluck too loudly," he said. Our boy riding his bicycle on the shared portion of the drive annoyed him. One afternoon, as Cadence pedaled home, Jed yelled from his yard, "Hey, keep that thing on your own side." Cadence's eyes were as big as saucers when he told me. I marched over and told Jed to leave my child alone. He smirked. "Teach him boundaries," he replied. Minor annoyances escalated into harassment. He cranked up heavy music late at night with the speakers aimed toward our house. I began finding empty beer cans and fast food wrappers tossed over our fence. One morning, I noticed fresh boot prints around our well. "Lock everything up tight," I warned Amanda that evening. Sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the wood floors had me sitting upright. One night, a shadow moved past the chicken coop. Grabbing a flashlight, I walked out softly. Jet stood there, shining his beam inside the coop. "What are you doing?" I asked. He turned slowly and claimed he'd heard coyotes. "On my land," he added with a shrug. "Hard to tell where the line island." I told him to get off my property. He chuckled and sauntered back to his yard. We weren't the only ones he targeted. Down the hill, our friends Charlie and Robin dealt with his temper too. Over coffee one morning, Charlie shook his head. "Jed's been hollering at us about the road," he said. "Says we're driving too fast past his driveway. He's called the law twice." I asked why Jed seemed so wound up. Charlie sighed. "Some folks bring all their baggage with them." I began documenting every incident. I mounted a camera near the driveway and caught Jed yanking out our property stakes at noon. I showed the video to the sheriff. They visited him, but he denied everything. Around that time, Jed mocked me, calling me a hillbilly because of our simple life. To lighten the mood, I painted a sign with "Hillbilly Holler" and nailed it by our gate. I thought he might find it humorous. Instead, he ripped it down in the dark. Amanda pleaded with me to consider moving. "I don't feel safe here," she said through tears. This land was our dream, though. I wasn't about to let a bitter neighbor run us off. The day things finally boiled over was hot and thick. Cadence and I were out building a new chicken coop. He handed me nails and chattered about getting more hens. I told him we'd see. Jed's truck barreled up the drive. He jumped out, red-faced, and stormed toward us. "You think that sign is funny?" he shouted. I stepped between him and my boy, urging him to calm down. He shoved me hard. I fell back onto the dirt. Cadence screamed, standing over me. Jed's eyes were wild. He spat, "I'm going to kill you." Before I could scramble up, he snatched a mattock, a heavy pickaxe, from my pile of tools and swung it downward. I felt a sickening crack. Pain exploded along my jaw and ear. Blood poured down my neck. I rolled away, screaming. Cadence sprinted to the house, yelling for Amanda. She dialed 911 while I pressed my hand to my shattered ear, the world spinning in blurry circles. Jed stood panting for a heartbeat, and then, as if coming to his senses, tossed the tool aside and fled in his truck. Doctors at the hospital stitched my torn ear and wired several cracked teeth. One of them shook his head and told me that if the blade had struck an inch higher, it might have killed me. My face swelled and bruised, and I lived on soup for weeks. Amanda sat by my bedside, gripping my fingers. "He almost took you from us," she said. Police arrested Jed at his workplace the next day. They charged him with attempted murder. He tried to claim I'd attacked him first, but my camera had captured the shove, the thread, and the swing. In court, neighbors testified about his harassment. Charlie told the judge that Jed had been trouble from the start. Jed's attorney argued his client felt threatened as a single man off the grid. The judge watched the footage several times. It seemed justice would be served, but in the end, the charges were reduced through a plea deal. Jed sold his property and moved away. We stayed, but our haven was different. Each night before bed, I checked the locks twice and scanned the dark tree line through the windows. Cadence wakes from nightmares, whimpering about Jed. Amanda flinches whenever a truck engine echoes up the hollow. Living off the grid, we imagined freedom. Instead, one bad neighbor turned our slice of peace into a place of fear. Even though he's gone, I still sometimes feel as though his stare lingers among the trees, a reminder of how quickly safety can vanish. My wife, Emily, inherited an old wood-framed cabin deep in the forest from her father last summer, and we decided to take the chance on a fresh start. The cabin sat almost 70 miles from the nearest town, with no power lines, no water pipes, just a generator humming out back and a hand-dug well. Emily thought the isolation would be good for us. Our son Tom was 10 and our daughter Lily had just turned 8. They were thrilled at first, running through the trees and treating every fallen log like an adventure. The place needed work. I spent hours on the roof patching holes and clearing brush. Emily painted the walls and organized the kitchen. We chose to homeschool the kids because the schoolhouse was too far to drive each day. For a while, life there was everything we hoped: quiet, simple, ours. The nearest supplies came from a small gas station and general store about 20 minutes away. Walter, the owner, knew everybody and kept the shelves stocked with canned goods, hardware, and gossip. The first time I mentioned the generator spitting out, he warned, "Watch out for the folks who roam these woods. Some live hard and don't like strangers." I laughed it off at the time. That first incident came one afternoon when the kids came barreling back from the woods. "Dad, there's a man watching us," Tom panted. Lily's eyes were the size of saucers. "He was behind a tree," she whispered. Thinking they'd let their imaginations run wild, I went to check. We searched the nearby trees and found no footprints, no broken branches. Still, I told them to stay closer to the cabin. A couple of nights later, the generator sputtered and died just after sundown. Grumbling, I went out with a flashlight. The gas cap was loose and fuel had leaked across the ground. Someone had tampered with it. I tightened the cap, wiped up what I could, restarted the generator, and went back inside, my nerves jangling. The next time I stopped at Walter's store, I told him about it. He frowned. "Could be Marty," he said in a low voice. "He's a hermit who lives a couple miles through the trees, keeps to himself. Folks say he's unpredictable." I asked Walter to elaborate, but he just shook his head. Best not to bother him. Within a week, Tom and Lily saw the man again. "He's tall, with a scruffy beard," Lily said. "He waved, but not in a friendly way," Tom added. "I saw a gun on his belt." Emily urged me not to go anywhere near him, but I couldn't ignore someone lurking around our children. Following a faint path through the pines, I eventually came to a sagging shack with bits of junk piled outside. A man stepped out on the porch. He fit their description. "What do you want?" he asked, voice rough. "I live down the way," I answered, keeping my tone even. "My kids say they've seen you watching them. We just want to make sure there's no misunderstanding." He stared at me for a long moment, then spat on the dirt. "Keep your brats off my land," he grunted. "This is mine." I told him our property line didn't overlap. Maybe we could agree to give each other space. He grunted again and disappeared back inside. That night, the generator failed again. This time, cables had been yanked loose. I fixed them with shaking hands and pounded nails into my door frame so the hinges wouldn't give easily. Emily suggested we pack up. "It's not worth it," she whispered in bed, the kids asleep in the next room. "What if he's dangerous?" I told her I wouldn't let one man run us off. "We can handle this," I insisted. Though the knot in my stomach tightened, the real confrontation came on a hot Saturday afternoon. Tom and Lily were playing near the edge of the clearing when they suddenly screamed and sprinted toward the cabin. "He's chasing us with a gun!" Tom yelled. I ushered them inside and shouted for Emily to lock the door. Then I grabbed my rifle and ran into the trees. Branches whipped my arms as I crashed through the undergrowth. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hold up!" A tall figure burst from behind a cedar, a sawed-off shotgun in his hands. It was Marty. He pointed the muzzle at my chest. "Told you to keep them off my land," he snarled. "They're just children," I replied, raising my own rifle, but not aiming at him. "Put it down." He barked a harsh laugh. "You think you own this? I was here first." For a few tense seconds, we stood there, guns pointed. Sweat trickled down my back. My mind flashed to Emily and the kids cowering inside. "Back away," I said, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "Go home." His grip slackened, and he lowered his weapon a fraction. "This isn't over," he spat. Then he melted into the trees. My knees went weak once he was gone. I raced back to the cabin, and we piled into the truck. We drove straight to town and marched into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Harlan listened, leaning back in his chair. "Marty's been on my radar," he admitted. "We'll check it out." That afternoon, deputies accompanied us back. They walked through the woods to Marty's shack. Emily and I waited at home, our guns within reach. Hours later, the phone rang. "You did the right thing," Harlan said. "We found a body. His wife, shot multiple times and barely buried." My blood ran cold. Marty had murdered his wife and hidden the grave in a shallow pit. Further digging into his past revealed he'd killed her ex-boyfriend decades earlier and somehow avoided prison. They arrested him on the spot and added new charges for threatening us. He went to jail, but the damage lingered. For weeks afterwards, Lily drew frightened pictures of the bearded man in the trees, and Tom refused to venture beyond the yard. Emily kept the doors locked even in daylight. At night, I would hear branches snap or leaves rustle. I told myself it was deer, but I'd still get up, rifle and flashlight in hand. Living out there, we had wanted peace and ended up staring down a killer. Even now, a year later, if a twig cracks in the dark, my mind returns to that day. Out in those woods, you never truly know who else is out there. Last year, I bought a little cabin on 10 acres of wooded land, thinking the wide space and fresh air would cure the stress I'd built up after years in the city. The place sat far back from the main road, with solar panels for electricity and water drawn from a well. I had one neighboring household about a mile away, a couple who lived off the grid like I planned to. I met them shortly after I moved in. The man introduced himself as Tom. He gripped my hand with calloused fingers and said little. His wife Lena gave a small smile, though her eyes remained cold. "We like our privacy," Tom told me. "You will too, if you stay." I nodded and went back to cutting firewood, feeling reassured and uneasy at the same time. For the first few weeks, I worked on the cabin, chopping logs for winter, clearing paths, and exploring the trails. The evenings were peaceful. Then one night, around midnight, I woke to the crunch of footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. My heart pounded. I grabbed a flashlight and peered through the window. Darkness stared back. I told myself it might be a deer or a coyote. But the next morning, I found large boot prints in the mud by the porch prints that led toward the neighbor's property. That afternoon, I walked over there. Tom was splitting wood. "Did you hear anything strange last night?" I asked. "Someone walked around my place." He paused and wiped his brow. "Nope," he said flatly. "Why?" I told him about the prints. Lena appeared carrying a basket of vegetables. "Probably just wildlife," she said, voice sweet but eyes hard. "We get all kinds out here." I tried to smile and went home feeling unsettled. Their yard was immaculate. Tools hung in straight lines on the wall. But when they glanced at each other, I caught a flicker of something unspoken. A couple of nights later, the footsteps returned. This time, I heard a soft thump against the cabin wall, like a hand pressing the wood. My dog Buddy growled deep in his throat. "Shh," I whispered, resting a hand on his head. But he kept staring at the door. I peeked through a slit in the curtain. A long, thin shadow stood just beyond the tree line. It lingered for a minute, then melted back into the woods. At daybreak, I followed the tracks. Fresh prints circled the cabin and stopped under my bedroom window. I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded indifferent. "Out there, it's likely hunters or kids," he said. "We'll send someone when we can." No one came. On my next trip into town, I mentioned it at the general store. The old man behind the counter leaned close. "Tom and Lena have been on that land forever," he said quietly. "Don't take kindly to newcomers. Folks say they ran off the last man who tried to build near them. Watch yourself." The advice seemed like paranoia, until a few nights later, when small rocks began pelting my roof. Thunk, thunk, Buddy barked. I jumped up and switched on the porch light. "Who's out there?" I shouted. Silence pressed back. Then a low voice floated from the trees. "Hey," it drawled, distorted, as if someone were mocking Tom's voice. My hair stood on end. "Tom, is that you?" I called. No answer. Another rock sailed through the air and landed with a dull thud. I fired a warning shot high into the sky. The boom echoed through the hollows. The rocks stopped. I sat in the dark, gun across my knees, until dawn. The next morning, I stomped over to their place. Tom was mending a fence. Lena watched from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Did you throw rocks at my place last night?" I demanded. Tom glanced up slowly. "What?" he said. "We were asleep." I told him I'd heard someone call my name. He laughed, but it came out forced. "Probably the wind playing tricks," he said. "Or coyotes yipping. They mimic sounds sometimes." Lena stepped closer, tilting her head. "You sure city folks can handle this kind of quiet?" she asked. As they turned, I noticed a strip of fresh mud on Tom's boots, the same red clay I'd seen under my bedroom window. I bit back my anger and walked away without another word. Things escalated after that. Tools I'd left on the porch would be rearranged. The axe I kept by the chopping block leaned against a different tree. A rocking chair on my deck was turned to face the woods. One afternoon, while splitting logs, I felt the weight of eyes. Looking up, I saw a figure cloaked in gray blending into the trees. It watched me without moving. "Do you need something?" I called. The figure ducked away. I ran toward where it had been, but the forest swallowed any path. With my nerves fraying, I went to the sheriff in person. "Somebody is messing with me," I insisted. The deputy scribbled notes and promised to check. That evening, he drove by and walked the property. "No obvious signs," he said. "We'll talk to your neighbors." As the sun set, Tom appeared at my doorstep. His jaw was clenched. "I hear you called the law," he said. "You accusing us?" I said I just wanted whoever was harassing me to stop. He stepped closer, looming. "Out here, people look after what's theirs," he warned. Lena emerged from the gloom. "Come home," she whispered. As she pulled him away, I saw a small, smooth stone in her palm, like the ones thrown at my roof. I hadn't wanted to live like a paranoid recluse, but I had little choice. I installed motion-activated lights around the cabin and set up a camera over the porch. That night, the lights flashed on shortly after midnight. My camera feed showed a figure in gray circling the house. He paused at the window and cupped his hands against the glass. Then he stooped, picked up a stick, and whipped it at the wall. In the glow, the features were unmistakable, Tom. My heart hammered. I called the deputy at once. "It's him," I said. "Come now." While I waited, scratching started at the front door, like nails gouging wood. Buddy barked himself hoarse. "Go away," I shouted. The scratching stopped. A soft voice drifted from the porch. "Let me in. It's cold." It sounded eerily like Lena's voice, sweet and wavering. I peered through the peephole. No one stood there. Then a crash from the back of the cabin. Glass shattered. A hand reached through the broken window for the latch. I fired through the wall. A scream rang out. Running to the front, I flung open the door. Tom lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading across his shirt. Lena stood in the yard, gripping a crowbar. "He only wanted to talk," she said flatly. Blue lights swept up the drive. The deputy ran over and placed them both in cuffs. Later, the sheriff told me Tom had a record for stalking and harassing a neighbor years earlier. He and Lena had chosen to live off the grid to keep the law at arm's length. They decided I was a threat, too close and too curious, and wanted me gone. "You're lucky you caught them on camera," the sheriff said. I sold the cabin within a month and moved back to the city. Sometimes, though, when I lie awake at night, I swear I can still hear those slow, deliberate footsteps circling the house, and I wonder whether I'll ever feel truly safe again. I packed up my things and headed for the quiet hills of Calaveras County at the start of the 1980s, craving distance from the noise and crowds. The spot I bought offered exactly that. A modest cabin far from any neighbors, with a generator humming for power, a well for water, and a dirt road the only connection to the rest of the world. I had always imagined myself living simply, reading by lantern light, and growing my own food. My nearest neighbors were about a mile away down that winding road, two men who mostly kept to themselves. I saw them as fellow hermits, people who'd chosen this life for the same reasons. The older of the two introduced himself while I was mending a fence. He had a heavy beard and an easy manner, carrying a toolbox under one arm. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said in a calm, confident voice. I thanked him, and we worked side by side for a while. He told me his name was Leonard and described his homestead. He had solar panels he'd wired himself, a huge garden, and, he said with a conspiratorial wink, a bunker dug into the hill. "Insurance," he explained. "If things ever go sideways in the world, you need a place to hunker down." When I asked him what he meant, he just smiled and said, "It's smart to be prepared." Later that day, the younger neighbor appeared at the edge of my property. He was leaner, his gaze sharp enough to make you uncomfortable. He said little at first, just handed Leonard a wrench and mumbled something about checking traps. Then he fixed his eyes on me. "You live alone?" he asked abruptly. I nodded, and he grunted. Fewer complications. His name was Charles. Over the next few weeks, the two would drop by with offers of coffee and chat. I accepted once out of politeness. Their cabin looked rough from the outside, but inside felt wrong. Bookcases sagged under stacks of survival manuals. Maps covered the walls, dotted with pins marking remote locations. Leonard liked to pontificate. "People in cities are soft," he'd say, reclining in a worn chair. "Out here you find out who you really are." Charles rarely spoke. He sat at the table, honing a knife or cleaning a gun. When I asked about their backgrounds, Leonard told me he had been a photographer once and traveled a lot. Charles muttered something about the military but went quiet. "Not worth talking about," he grumbled. Odd things began to catch my attention. One evening, I heard what sounded like an animal scream drifting on the wind from their direction. It cut off abruptly. The following day, I walked over. Leonard met me at the door with his usual grin. "Just a varmint caught in a trap," he said casually. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed Charles dragging a bulky tarped bundle toward a hatch in the hill the entrance to the bunker Leonard had mentioned. "What's in the bag?" I asked, forcing my tone to stay light. Leonard's smile tightened. "Supplies," he said. "Winter's coming." I let it go, but uneasiness gnawed at me. Cars began pulling up to their place at odd hours. License plates I didn't recognize. People would go inside, but I never saw them leave. Once a woman in a bright red coat arrived alone. Through my binoculars, I watched Charles open the door and let her in. Hours passed, and she did not reemerge. Early the next morning, her car was gone. When Leonard came by later to borrow a coil of wire, I mentioned the visitors. He waved it off. "Friends from town," he said. "They left early." Then he leaned closer. "We've got a big project going. You ever think about joining something bigger? I declined quickly. His eyes flicked to the side, and he changed the subject. My sleep grew fitful. On a moonless night, a scream pierced the silence, a human cry, this time cut short by a thud. Heart hammering, I slipped on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and crept up the dirt road, staying off to the side. Leonard's cabin glowed faintly. Through a small window, I saw silhouettes. Charles stood over a figure on the floor, bound and squirming. Leonard leaned down, holding some kind of tool, a hammer? The person whimpered. Leonard whispered words I couldn't catch. My stomach churned. I backed away and ran home without making a sound. Once there, I barred the door and pushed furniture against it. What had I just witnessed? A terrifying scenario lodged itself in my mind. I considered calling the county sheriff, but my phone line was unreliable, and what could I prove? The next day, everything looked normal. Leonard waved as he drove past. But near the mouth of their bunker, I saw mounds of freshly turned earth. A week later, Leonard stopped by again. "Come to dinner," he invited. We butchered a hog. Charles loitered behind him, arms folded across his chest. I faked a cough and said I wasn't feeling well. Leonard's friendly expression cooled. "Suit yourself," he said, but his tone turned hard. As they left, Charles glared at me. "By the way," he said softly, "we know you've been watching." That evening I began packing. At dawn, I planned to drive into town and tell the authorities everything. I tossed essentials into a duffel and kept my rifle by the bed. Around 3 in the morning, gravel crunched outside. I peered through a crack in the curtain. Leonard and Charles were walking up the path, rifles slung over their shoulders. "Open up!" Leonard called. "We need a word." I didn't answer. Charles tested the window latches, then circled the cabin. "He knows too much," I heard him mutter. Leonard chuckled low. "Then we'll take him to the bunker like the rest," he answered. My blood ran cold. They jostled the door, but I had braced it. After a moment, Leonard whispered something I couldn't hear. Their footsteps receded. Engines roared to life. They had gone back to their truck. Without waiting to confirm, I grabbed my keys and dashed to my car. As my headlights swept down the drive, their truck's lights flared behind me. They were pursuing. I floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed. The road wound along a ravine, one slip from a steep drop. Their bumpers slammed into mine. Once, twice, my car fishtailed. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Up ahead, a narrow bridge spanned the gorge. I crossed with inches to spare as they hit me again. My rear tire blew and the car spun. I flung open the door and tumbled into the brush as the vehicle slid to a stop. Hidden behind a boulder, I held my breath. Footsteps crunched closer. "Where'd he go?" Charles snarled. "He was right here." Leonard's voice cut through the dark. "We'll find him. The sirens aren't near yet." Then faint wailing filtered through the trees. Someone must have heard the gunshots or the crash and called for help. "Go," Leonard hissed. I listened to them run back to their truck and peel away. Deputies arrived soon afterward, their flashers painting the trees blue and red. Trembling, I told them everything. They searched Leonard and Charles's property. What they uncovered was worse than my imagination. In the bunker were shallow graves and racks of tools meant for torture. Tapes showed victims bound and pleading. Leonard swallowed poison before deputies could cuff him. Charles fled into the hills, but was captured days later. Investigators tied them to at least 11 disappearances. Advertisements for jobs and ventures had lured strangers to their property, where the men murdered them and disposed of their bodies. I sold my land as soon as I could and moved back to the city. Even now, decades later, I wake in the night, hearing gravel crunch outside, and wonder if the danger ever truly left. In a place that remote, evil blends easily into the trees, and the smile of a friendly neighbor can mask horrors you don't want to imagine.